Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the February 11th, 2014 Public Works Committee meeting. Before I get started into the meeting here, I just want to remind everybody to turn off their cell phones or put it to the vibrate position, and if you need to make a call or take a call, would you take it out into the hallway, please? Thank you. And while Brenda's doing a roll call and a determination of quorum, I'm going to check my phone as well. Brenda.
Estes. Here. Nordstrom.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Scott. Here. Clayton. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brenda. Now is the time for adoption of the agenda. The chair will entertain a motion. Motion is made by Alderwoman Scott, second by Alderman Roberts to adopt the agenda. Seeing no discussion, those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed. Motion carries. Now is the time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting or on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the alderman present. Now we'll move into consent items 1 through, and I did not receive any public comment from anyone. I just want to make sure I did not skip anybody. Thank you. We'll move into the consent items 1 through 41. And at the moment, we're going to be pulling number 17 and number 39. Is there anyone else that wishes to pull an item from today's agenda? Chair will recognize Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to also pull item number 31.
Item 31.
32.
32.
And 41.
And 41. Thank you.
And the two items you pulled again, just for verification, was?
17 and 39.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other lights. The chair will entertain a motion to adopt the remainder of the consent items. Second. Motion made by Alderman Clayton, seconded by Alderman Estes to adopt the agenda items excluding items 17, 31, 32, 39, and 41. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Going to item number 17 is an agreement between the City of Rapid City and Geologic Associates Incorporated for design and bidding professional services for the 2014 solid waste permit amendment in the amount of $229,115. And the chair will recognize the Public Works Director, Terry Wolterstorff.
Thank you, Chairman. If we could, I'd like to have our Superintendent Carl Murbach just give you guys a brief synopsis on what this project all entails.
Chair recognizes Mr. Murbach.
Good afternoon, Carl Murbach, Superintendent of the Solid Waste Division. We were asked to just give a little bit of background on this expense here, a little bit of history. We operate under a permit supplied by the DENR. They are 5-year permits. Our permit actually expired back on October of 2013. We did apply for just a renewal of that permit with no changes or just some minor changes to that. Many of you may remember that 11 years ago, we purchased an additional 106 acres to the south of the existing landfill. This is commonly known as, we've always called it the Johnson property. For the first 10 years, part of our purchase agreement was we would do nothing with that property. With that 10-year grace period out of the way, we have started discussions on what do we do with that. It was an agreement made internally and through Public Works here that because of permitting this new property, this is pretty much like permitting a brand new landfill. There has been nothing done on this property. no environmental assessments, no other things. So we are looking at that scope to permit this, but also some other internal changes, and I have brought along Justin Van Greshepie. Justin is our project manager, and I will let him explain some of the specific scope that we are looking at as part of this project.
Thanks, Carl. Again, Justin Van Greshepie, Solid Waste Project Manager. As Carl alluded to, we are trying to expand our permit to include the new 106-acre parcel known as the Johnson property to the south of our facility. Expansion into this requires a lot of background information. We have to go through all the environmental assessments to make sure the DENR is satisfied. These include possibly a 404 permit, your phase 1, phase 2 environmental studies, things of that nature. We also need to do a full-blown geotechnical study, hydrogeology study, figure out our groundwater elevations, things like that. So there's a lot of field work and a lot of background information involved with this permit modification. It's not solely just renewing our permit and a paperwork thing. We did that last year when we renewed the permit for 5 years, went through the paperwork process. This entails much more, including the environmental assessment alluded to and all the engineering design for it. The 106 acres will probably get us in the neighborhood of, ballpark, I think it was 5 to 7 million more tons of airspace, which is $200 to $300 million worth of revenue for the city. So it also expands the site life of the site, of the facility, by anywhere from 50 to 60 years, kind of depending on when we go through the details and stuff. So it's a big amendment, it's a big change to increase the life of our site, increase the value of the asset at the landfill, and entails a lot of engineering and background design. So we just wanted to clarify it's more than just a paperwork renewal that was done last year. It's a full-blown permit amendment. Any questions?
Thank you, Justin. And on behalf of the Public Works Committee, I'd like to welcome you aboard to the city. I know you're fairly new at this, and so I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you.
Thanks.
And I know, Carl, you've got several years about experience with the DENR, and I know you're have a new person under the wing, so to speak, to help you out over there, and looking forward to having the opportunity to visit with Justin a little bit farther. But in your relationship with the DENR, responses to your permit applications, have you got any experience that you would like to share with us?
Other than we start early in working with them. They understand the scope that we are looking at. Part of our contract with our consultant is those early meetings. In fact, we were talking about a meeting, coming up fairly early in the process. So they're on board with how we're going about things, what we need to do, and how we need to go about permitting this property. It is going to take a while. This is not anything we need immediately. This is really looking at the future. Please understand that now is probably the time to go out and get this permitted, get all the work done. 10 years from now, who knows what the rules are going to be like or how things will change. But again, this is the logical next step for us, is to begin this permitting process. The property is there. It is owned by the city. Right now, we cannot do anything with it because it is not part of our existing permit. The other thing we are looking at are internal changes. How is our setup? A lot of these things were set up 15, 20 years ago, and our scope can change a little bit. One of the things we are possibly looking at doing is setting up what's called a construction and demolition, a C&D section of the landfill that takes less work. It doesn't take an official liner and the groundwater monitoring, other things too that may help us better control costs. So there are a lot of things involved with this. Why waste good MSW airspace with just filling it up with construction debris? So a lot of these things are being taken into account.
Thank you, Mr. Murbach. The chair will recognize Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification purposes, so a 5-year renewal permit application was filed last year, and the city's received that.
We've not gotten actual approval on it, but we get administrative extension because we submitted on time. But now we're going through the review process, and that takes it could take anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So we've gotten one set of comments back, resubmitted those, and now waiting to hear back. So we're good with our permit from that standpoint. It's just we haven't got the final approval from the state.
And that's, if I remember correctly, that's typical for renewal permits, is that it sometimes takes a little while. So we're going on
Gonna get
yeah, I was
approved.
going to say assumption, but I don't like using the word assumption. But we're going on the assumption that the city is going to have their 5-year renewal. So that would take us to 2018. For clarification, when we're reapplying, are we actually working on the 2018 permit then to incorporate the Johnson property?
And I guess the way to look at this is an amendment. It's kind of worded that way. We have our existing permit, so there will be a lot of other things on top of this. The amendment will include the Johnson property, that, and any other changes. And the changes are anything from, how high we can build, how wide we can build, what are some of the restrictions. As Justin said, stormwater, groundwater monitoring, other things too. Again, with our initial submittal last year, it was really nothing more than we want to maintain our existing permit. No major changes to that, a few updates and modifications there. This, knowing that this was coming through this year.
And another thing to add to this on the timing wise, coming in last year, we basically were on a time crunch to get the permit renewal in. Didn't have time to go through all the analysis we need to go through for the amendment to add the Johnson property. What this also does when we extend our site life, what we have to do financially is show that we have post-closure funding for the site, and then you can let time, interest and time over years add on to what we have in our account. Well, if we extend the site life 60 years, time then gets on our side, so we don't have to have much funding set aside today. So financially, it makes sense as well to get it done as soon as possible, because then we can extend the site life and the amount of tons that our site has to fill up, as opposed to waiting 5 more years to do that.
But to answer your question, yes, this really is kind of working on the next round of renewals, the 2018. The permit will look completely different once we get the amended permit. That will become part of our overall permit. It won't be an amendment anymore. It will all be integrated into the overall permit.
And that's where I was trying to get to. So if we've applied for, as a city, our 5-year renewal, basically that gives us the leeway once it comes through within the next 60 to 90 days, and we have it because they've basically given preliminary approval with the first comments. We've got 5 years to accomplish this amendment, and then this new amended permit would take over. So, and that's where I'm coming up with, if it comes through in 2017, if it comes through in 2016, the whole point is it's not part of this renewal, it's actually something totally new.
Exactly.
It really is.
And we're working on
totally new, and again, our permit will look different the next time we do get that official renewal.
And our 5-year renewal fills in the gap until we get this new one approved.
We can still take garbage.
All right, thanks
yeah,
for
we're
that
not gonna close.
clarification.
No, we're not closing down.
All right, thank you.
If the chair can interject a comment here for our Alderman Scott, I understand your use of the word assumption and the hesitation on the word using assumption in the case of DNR. Thank you. Chair will now recognize Alderman Clayton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to kind of jump in and help to clarify for anybody who might be confused at that last conversation, is that based on the fact that the Johnson property isn't slated for use anytime soon, it's just a matter of getting it permitted to be added onto our footprint, and then at the right time, when there's a need, it will be all integrated as one integral piece.
Exactly. We're not going to, it's not that we're going to start filling it tomorrow once it gets amended. Right now it's permitted for future landfill, but we don't have the permits. It's not into the permit as far as an MSW disposal. So household garbage we can't dispose of into it yet. It's in our boundary of landfill, but we can't dispose of garbage into it yet. But with this permit amendment, we'll get to the point where we can, and then it'll be sitting on the side and extending our site life of permitted airspace that we can use.
It would be a different story if we really needed it right now because we were at full capacity. But the fact that we're doing something very proactive, and as you gentlemen alluded to, not in any particular detail, is that history, I think, tells us that constraints are getting tighter and tighter and tighter, so it makes sense to have it permitted now so that it's basically grandfathered, we hope, so that we've got that waiting out there in the wings to extend the life of the landfill as we know it. So I thank you for being proactive in that regard, and I think this is a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Clayton. The chair will recognize Alderwoman Scott. And Alderwoman Scott, have you got a thesaurus going for us? Instead of using the word assumption? Go ahead.
No, I'm just making out a straight-out motion to approve this item.
Just for the audience, there's some inside humor about our relationship, working relationship with the DNR, and those folks are trying to do the best they can with what they've got. So hopefully this is not the humor is not at their expense. It's just we understand their situation and what they're dealing with. So Alderwoman made the motion to adopt, and
Yes, Mr. Chair, and just for clarification,
Yes.
I believe the humor is at the chairman's expense. Thank you.
we get to use the gavel later. Okay. So the motion is to acknowledge or approve the agreement, and by Alderwoman Scott and second by Alderman Roberts. Those not seeing any further discussion, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Item 31. I think I've got them all. Okay. Item 31 is to approve the resolution number 2014-021 declaring Highmark Incorporated and Dale Schulke, non-responsible bidders on the award of future city projects. And I will yield to our city attorney, Joel Landine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask to continue this for 2 weeks. I was contacted by the office of the attorney for Mr. Schulke. He is out of the country today and is just getting back into the country this week. And Mr. Schulke just had back surgery. I don't think 2 weeks will significantly impact this, but I wanted to make sure it stayed on the agenda and got addressed. So if you'll continue it, we can pick it up in 2 weeks.
The chair will suggest February 25th, that as being 2 weeks. Does the city attorney concur with that? Okay. The chair will now recognize Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make that motion.
Motion by Alderwoman Scott to continue this item for 2 weeks to February 25th, seconded by Alderman Estes. Not seeing any further discussion. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Item 32 is authorize staff to seek proposals for professional services for design build of natural service trails in the Skyline Wilderness Park Phase 2. And the chair will recognize Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm contemplating starting off with a motion, but I won't. I'll just request to ask some questions of the Parks Department.
Fair enough. The chair will recognize Parks Department Jeff Bigler, Director.
Hi. Jeff, the motion that I was contemplating making, only because this is in the same list of motions as number 30, which is actually to approve the procedures for design, build, procurement of public improvement projects, best value process. And it just seems to me that we're trying to dovetail and take care of two things at one time, when it just seems the sequence should be number 30 should be approved, and then we should come back once it's been approved and adopted, that we should go back and apply or authorize staff to seek professional services for design build. So if you've got some
I will.
insight, that'd be great.
Alex DeSmet, our landscape architect, has been working on both of these, and I will allow him to respond.
Alex, you have the floor.
Thank you. That's definitely one way we could proceed. Basically, to pursue 32, yes, we need to approve number 30, the procedures. But all we're asking is to be authorized to seek the RFQ for number 32. That won't go out until number 30 is through council.
What happens if 30 is denied? This is just a recommending body, so I'm just asking, what happens if it's denied?
Then 32 would come back through at a later date.
So would it be more prudent to continue item number 32 for 2 weeks and at least put it in the correct sequential order?
You definitely could do that, yes.
How long do you think the RFQ would take to get the proposals back?
By the time we have a contract, it'd probably be about May through the process. So it's kind of trying to expedite that process.
And that seems like a fairly significant time frame in order to come back and
Well, what
tweak
I mean is going through the RFQ, going through the RFP, sending those out, getting those back, having the consultants and contractors adequate time to process that information and submit that, and then for us to consider that and then go through the selection process. By the time we actually have a contract in place to begin the design and construction, we're looking at about May. So what we're just trying to do is expedite that process a little bit.
All right. Thank you for that clarification.
And if I might add, the reason they're both on at the same time is so that they could be considered together and show you that why we're updating the design-build procedures is for this project specifically at this time, but can be used on other projects.
Yes, I get that, but from a procedural point of view, that was the question that I raised in my mind was, it seems like the sequence of this is a little out of order, but so you've answered my questions. It does appear as if there's enough significant time in between to implement, and that the item number 30, as approved by the City Council, would give enough time in order for this to fall into place without having to hold it up. So, but I would just, you'll probably hear from me every time you try to do two things at one time. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
While you're gathering thoughts on doing the motion, Alderwoman Scott, the chair will now recognize Alderman Clayton.
Gentlemen, can you expound just a little bit? Is there any reason to believe that there would be a denial of number 30 and that 30 and 32 could not proceed coincidentally? And if in fact 30, for whatever reason, were denied by the council, it seems just a matter of spinning that in a different way to bring it back up. I guess how receptive are you to a delay?
We will definitely proceed either way. A delay won't impact us that greatly, to be honest. Does that answer the question? Would you like me to expound on that?
Well, I'm just wondering. You brought them both up together, so that
correct.
You know better what's on your desk certainly than we do, and I would guess that there's some reasoning behind trying to join these, or present them co-joined, and I'm just wondering if how much of a curveball does it throw you if in fact number 30 is denied?
Basically, we considered both of these. With legal counsel, Carla specifically, worked with us through both of these. She's due to leave us shortly. So basically kind of streamline that process and have these both considered at the same time is kind of the rationale, part of the rationale behind that. So that if needed, we can have her review things other than different city attorney staff, trying to bring them back up to speed and that sort of thing. So,
I mean, our job here is certainly to keep you within certain boundaries, but not to frustrate you in the performance of your duties. And what I'm trying to ascertain is that, and this is news to me, so now we've got personnel changes. So we've got a project that's underway, for lack of a better term.
Correct.
And it seems almost matter of fact that if 30 were denied for whatever reason, 32 could proceed in a slightly different venue, but without the delays. So I'm wondering, are we just creating a delay just procedurally so that it looks better, or are we really accomplishing something by putting it off?
No, I think Alderwoman Scott made a good point that, you know, the order of operations could be separated for both of these. And by moving one back, it's not going to really affect the project in that regard, you know, whether it's May or June that we have a contract in place. Yeah, that'll set us back a little bit in terms of construction, but the anticipated construction is kind of a lengthy process, so I don't have any major concerns with that at this point.
Fair enough. If you're okay, I'm okay. Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Clayton. Chair will recognize Alderman Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to approve. I'd like to keep the floor if I could.
You're making a motion to approve, and I heard Alderwoman Scott second that. You have the floor.
Thank you. I have a question, if I could, for our attorney, Joel Lundin.
Mr. Landy, you may ask.
At council, if 30 goes through on consent, is there any waiting time, or is that approved?
Legally, it doesn't become effective till 20 days after publication. That is really just to allow, if somebody wants to refer an action you take, it gives them a time to refer it before it becomes effective. I will generally say on a resolution, if you give us direction, anything you do is either an ordinance or a resolution. If you give us direction, generally it goes into effect the next day, unless it appears it's going to be referred and it's more of a major decision that would impact citizens and things. But if it's an internal rule, internal guideline, for all practical purposes, it goes into effect the next day.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm not trying to be cute or cavalier. I was thinking, we procedurally, we already passed 30 in the consent, so we've passed 30 before we're looking at 32, and I have to trust that if something happens at council, that these gentlemen will regroup, but in essence of time, that's what I'm in favor of moving on. And I respect the issue that Councilman Scott and Councilperson Clayton have brought up, so thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any further lights here, the motion is to approve the authorization for staff to seek proposals for professional services. Not seeing any further discussion, those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carry on, gentlemen. Item number 39 is information item from the City Comprehensive Plan Consultant Economic and Planning System Incorporated, titled Cost of Growth Analysis and Public Financing Toolbox. And looking towards, there, Mr. Brent Limbaugh is here. Mr. Limbaugh, if you want to give us just a little bit of a background on this, we do have a couple of questions for you.
That's great. I'm prepared to make a full report at the council meeting as well. So what I can tell you briefly is that this is the memorandum that was prepared by the economic consultant, who is part of a team for our comprehensive plan. What they looked at was the costs of growth, in particular residential growth, and came to the conclusion that almost all planning agencies come to, that growth, especially single-family homes, don't pay their own way. That's a real shock, but that's the way it rolls out. So the more important portion of that report is a list, itemized list of alternative financing mechanisms that both the city can use and the developers can use to defray the costs of the construction of public improvements. There are a number of district suggestions, there are a number of sales tax recommendations that we can use. Oftentimes it's not just one individual tool, but it is a blend of them that works best. And one of the key tasks for our consultant was to identify these other financing mechanisms as not necessarily a replacement for TIF, but to supplement TIF, because as you know, right now we pretty much do everything with TIF, and there are so many other things available out there that other cities use across the nation. We think it's more than time that we take advantage of those systems as well. So that's essentially what the report outlines. I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Brett. If it's all right with the rest of the committee, I'd recommend that we send this to council without recommendation and look for the full report, and then also include that, and you don't have to make this part of the motion, but Brett, I did have a chance to read the entire white paper that was submitted by your department, and the work of the consultant is very good reading, very, very interesting reading, and the tools that they're available throughout the nation are worthwhile for Rapid City to take a look at. So it's a very good white paper. So if the rest of the committee would like to take a look at that, we'll get that information to you. The chair will now recognize Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make that motion that we send to council without recommendation and wait for the full report for Monday night.
Motion's made by Alderwoman Scott to send to council without recommendation, second by Alderman Clayton. Not seeing any further discussion. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed, thank you. Motion carries. Item number 41 is the 2012-2014 pedestrian and bicyclist crash report. And if I can look to Mr. Jagras to give us just a quick synopsis of the report, if you can, and then we'll proceed to questions with the council members. Oh, is it Dale? Okay, my apologies. It was Mr. Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, this report was prepared through my office by John Less, who is not here, unfortunately, to give a presentation on the data that was collected or the results. The report kind of speaks for itself. Hopefully everyone's had the opportunity to read it. He did an analysis of the 2013 PED bicycle crashes, compared that with previous year 2012 results, as well as the average of the decade before that. In general, Rapid City, the crash rate, pedestrian bicycle crash rate, is not unusually high, but it is a little higher than one would expect of a community of our size. The recommendations in the report is to do much more public education, not only for the bicyclists and pedestrians, but for the people that drive vehicles too, to help reduce the rate. I know in this past year, the City of Rapid City Police Department had I think it was a bike ped program that they did, with some stenciling that they did, and a lot of public education. I think John alludes to that in his report, that efforts like that need to continue in effort to try to educate the public on pedestrian bicycle safety.
Thank you, Dale. The chair will now recognize Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion.
You may.
To continue this for 2 weeks, to allow Mr. John Less to come back and give us a report on this with.
Going to have to hurry because he is leaving us?
He's no longer employed by the City of
That's
Rapid
what I was
City.
saying. That's right. That's right.
All
Yes.
right,
It was
then
the
if I
last-
can make my motion to send to council without recommendation.
Certainly, yes.
And the reason I'm requesting that is for Monday night, if it's possible, since he's leaving, if you can get some other background information. The main point when I read it, Dale, is that what I noticed in there is that the majority of the fault, or the person at fault, was not the drivers. It was the bicyclists. So that I found concerning.
If I may, I think the data for 2013 showed that there was 25 crashes, or 26 rather. 16 of them were vehicle caused and 9 were bicycle pedestrian caused. And there really isn't a trend there to analyze, but looking back, I think in the 10-year average, it was about an even split. I think it was about 50-50 cost. So 1 year of data that seems higher is not necessarily a trend that a person should say that there's a problem that we need to address. I think when we get a new traffic engineer on board and they look at this next year, we need to get a few more years under our belt, I think would be the prudent thing to do. In the meantime, though, the continuing effort for public education on bike ped safety, as I said, for all modes of transportation, is important to continue to do.
Has there been any analysis done as far as what the bicycle master plan would afford the reduction of these, or does that have no significance to play on the current report of accidents?
The recommendations of the bicycle pedestrian master plan generally describe good techniques and good design to separate or to have facilities that accommodate the different modes of transportation. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be any safer. And really that does go back to the education aspect of, you know, if you have a bicycle lane, you need to educate the public that that thing's for a bicycle. I mean, that lane's for a bicycle, and you as a motorist need to be cognizant that there may be a bicycle there, and you need to be cautious. You need to watch for those other users of the roadway. And I think that's important to focus on that in effort to, I guess, enhance overall awareness of there may be somebody else using the roadway that is allowed to do that. But I don't think the report itself, the bicycle pedestrian report, talked about if you do this, you'll have a 20% reduction in crashes. It didn't go into that level of detail.
No, but I also didn't necessarily see where was it separated out as far as where the accidents occurred, whether they were in a bicycle lane versus other areas outside of where there is a bicycle lane in the master already instituted in our streets.
Right. That you are correct. There was not that level of detail in this analysis either. So,
will you be able to provide any other further information or answer more questions on Monday? Or
I don't believe so. Kip Harrington, he's somewhat familiar with this too. I don't know if he can add anything at this time. That'd be a simple yes or no at this point in time, Kip, I guess, if you.
Chair will recognize Mr. Harrington.
it kind of wet our whistle a little bit, Kip, and, then just spurs more questions.
Sure. Kip Harrington, Long Range Planning. What I will say is one of the reasons that the bicyclist fault is very high is there's a state law in the books that requires any bicyclist while riding on a sidewalk to stop before entering an intersection. So if there is a crash in an intersection and the bicyclist did not stop before entering the intersection, it is automatically the bicyclist's fault regardless of what the driver was doing. And so that is one of the things that's recommended in the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan is more on-street bicycle facilities and more things like the Greenway path or the shared use path to get bicycles off of the sidewalk, because sidewalk is not really a great place for bicycles to ride. You're actually safer out in traffic than you are dealing with pedestrians and things like that. So that is one of the recommendations in the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, and we are obviously, these things take time, but as you can see that there's bike lanes on Canyon Lake Drive now, there will be bike lanes on Jackson Boulevard, and there are other facilities being built in the city to take people off the sidewalks and get them in possibly a safer position.
Do you have the information of where it states that the bicyclist was at fault? Was it on the sidewalks?
No, that would be in the crash reports, and Mr. Les had all those. I have not seen the crash reports themselves.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I yield the floor.
Thank you, Alderwoman Scott. Kip, since I've got you up here at the podium for a second, have you had a chance to study the correlation between the traffic count book and this bicyclist crash report? This conversation's generated a question for me about the number of accidents that we're seeing right now. Is there any correlation between that and the traffic counts?
Traffic counts generally increase a little bit every year. They fluctuate, obviously, depending on, especially when you're looking at a specific roadway, they fluctuate depending on weather, the date that the count was taken. Different types of road construction in the area lead to different volumes on different roadways, obviously. We did see an increase in bicycle crashes quite a bit in 2013. I may attribute that to more bicycle traffic being out there. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Anecdotally, I seem to see a lot more people riding bikes.
That's true.
However, we do not have any specific program in place to go out and count bicycle riders. We have tube counters for cars. They don't really necessarily work for bikes, and you couldn't distinguish bikes anyway. So short of having someone sit out there and count bikes or do some sort of video detection, that would be the only way to answer that question. But I would tend to think that overall bicycle traffic is up in the city, which could lead to a higher incidence of bicycle crashes.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Chair will recognize Alderman Clayton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Kip, for what you've added. Trying to figure out where to start. Alderman Estes and I are both avid bicyclists, and I think people will tend to notice more something that falls within their area of interest. So if I see a bicycle, I typically take a good hard look, trying to see what brand it is and what kind of trick stuff is on it. And one of the things that we see typically is bicyclists who violate the law in terms of riding against traffic because they think being able to see the oncoming traffic is a help, but it doubles the collision speed if in fact you're unfortunate enough to get a Buick on your front tire instead of your back tire. And typically it seems that when there's somebody who wants to see how close they can get to you on your bicycle, I do a lot of road riding and try to stay in the rural areas because riding in the city is just plumb dangerous, and riding on the bike path is even worse. And it seems like it's always a Dodge pickup where the mirror tries to take your ear off, or worse. And I would hope that, as we see a little bit of a hint, perhaps, of the coming of spring and some warmer weather and bicycles and motorcycles coming back out, that we as a city could engage the right people on our staff to start some education, perhaps right here, because typically we've got media who like to put things out there, for people to know what's going on here. So, and I hate to ask for more of the police department, but Carl, your guys are out there and see things, and I guess you've got better things to do than stop bicyclists. But when we've got craziness going on, people riding down the sidewalks, and I don't know why they would, and the typical motorist is not looking for a bicycle charging off the sidewalk into an intersection at 10 or 15 miles an hour. They're mindful of pedestrians, but a bicycle is always a surprise coming off a sidewalk. And and maybe rather than just dump it on the police department and say, can you guys enforce something, we can be proactive in terms of, with the coming of warm weather and the advent of bicyclists coming out of hibernation, some good, solid facts that are covered in the media that would help people be safer, and maybe change the mind of motorists. I'm troubled, quite frankly, by some of the comments I've read in the newspaper from motorists who say, I pay taxes, I pay for licenses, the bicycles don't, they've got no business there, and I'm going to run them all over. And some people drive with that state of mind. And I would ask, Carl, for you and your team, please, if your guys are seeing someone who's basically threatening the life of a bicyclist just because they think they have more right to the road than the bicyclist does, I'd like to see more than a stern warning. I'd like to see some paperwork so that people learn that they need to share the road. And it doesn't take much to move over. I've been places, if you go up into Oregon and Washington State, dedicated bike lanes, all nicely striped with signs, no motor vehicles. And they can ride two abreast or even three without getting into the traffic lane. And I will admit that it's some of my bicycle riding buddies who think they own the road and like to be two or three abreast and make the cars go around. They should be stopped and warned and perhaps ticketed as well. And I'm going to take the focus off of you, Kip, for just a minute. If I could ask a question of Assistant Chief Jegras. Carl, would you mind speaking just a little bit in that you don't need a driver's license to ride a bicycle on the street, but you're operating a vehicle of sorts on the street. If somebody on a bicycle, if they're riding three abreast and blocking traffic, if they're blowing through stop signs, which I'm guilty of too, because it's easier to keep rolling and get out of harm's way than it is to try to start from a dead stop on a bicycle. But I understand it's a ticketable offense. Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Mr. Jagers, Assistant Chief Jagers, you have the floor.
We do occasionally stop bicycles in a traffic stop format, but as you kind of alluded to, we are a little looser with them, and it's very rare to issue a citation to a bicycle operator for rolling through a stop sign compared to a car. A lot of these issues are relative to kids. Kids are out in the neighborhoods and aren't really paying attention to what side of the road they're on and those types of things. So that comes down to a parenting issue, and we do interact with those kids and try to informally encourage safer riding habits. So, did I answer your question?
I believe so, thank you. So I'll continue to blow through stop signs carefully and not block traffic because the bumper always wins against my carbon fiber bicycle. Thank you.
Assistant Chief, you certainly have the latitude to carry out your paperwork here as well. So.
Well, I was just going to mention that the police department did have a pedestrian safety campaign last year that focused on crosswalk enforcement. As you remember, we received a grant from the Office of Highway Safety for $40,000, which we utilized by hiring a marketing firm to create public service announcements for us. Most of those were along the lines of the play it safe or it's game over, but printed media, billboards, radio, and television advertisement, and we bought airspace with those funds as well. So we did put quite a bit of effort into public education last year, which, you know, the results of are not directly reflected in the outcome for the citizens of Rapid City last year. So there's a lot of room for improvement, but I think if you look at the very first bullet on page 11 of the report, it talks about changing longstanding cultural and societal attitudes often take several years to show results. So we're going to continue with our elevated prioritization of crosswalk safety, pedestrian safety, and continue that enforcement effort. Last year, we issued over 700 citations relative to crosswalk enforcement. Most of those were to drivers of vehicles, but 70-some of those were also to pedestrians for jaywalking. So we are putting a lot of effort into trying to change the culture regarding pedestrian safety in our city.
Thank you, Assistant Chief. Let me go to Dale Tech, City Engineer first, and then I'll have a couple of comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a couple clarifications. When Alderwoman Scott was asking me or had inquired about the bicyclists being more at fault, I threw out some numbers. Those were the PED crashes that I was referring to, so I got a little mixed up there. And then you had asked a question of Kip if there was any correlation versus the traffic counts versus the bike PED. There really isn't. If you look at the report on the bicycle pedestrian crashes, it's per population. It's per 100,000 population is how that rate is identified. And in any type of vehicular crashes, you're talking about million miles traveled is how that analysis is done. So we take our traffic counts or our traffic volumes, and from that we can determine how many million miles in a motor vehicle is traveled. But there's no correlation there between the bicyclists or the pedestrians in that vehicular data. So just wanted to clear those two items up.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And then Alderman Clayton was asking the question about getting this information out a little bit further into the public, and I do appreciate the police department's effort to get as much PR out there as well. But one of the other things as council members, we have the opportunity to go to service organizations, neighborhood watches, and the like. So it's an opportunity for us to take the message to the public as well. And we're certainly welcome to invite staff to come along and help assist us in that presentation, but that's another ample opportunity for us to help get the word out. Mr. Harrington.
Just a couple of other items of note. Alex and the Parks and Rec Department right now are submitting a bicycle-friendly community application. They're trying to get bicycle-friendly community status. With that, there are some recommendations of things that we can be doing to help improve and get the word out. So we'll be looking at those as well. I've been working with Alex quite a bit on this. And also, Alex and I are traveling to Pierre tomorrow to present on our Transportation Alternatives Program grant applications. And one of the applications that we have in is to upgrade all our signal crossings along the Leonard Swan East Swanson Memorial Pathway, aka the bike path that runs through the center of the community. So there are numerous at-grade intersections, and we're looking at trying to upgrade signals at many of those intersections. The big one that you might recognize is Sheridan Lake Road, right by Rapid Creek there, where those flashing beacons run all the time. We'd like to change those signals to a pedestrian or bicyclist activated beacon. The theory behind that is that the flashing lights, people become immune to those over time. If you drive by it every day, it just becomes part of your normal routine, so you don't pay attention to it. If it was to be specifically activated when there was someone waiting to cross, you may pay more attention. Another issue is that there have been complaints of bicyclists not stopping at the stop sign at that intersection and just blowing across the street as well. So by having an activated signal, that would force the bicyclist to actually stop, push the button to activate the signal, and thereby, pay attention to the stop sign. Of course, as Mr. Clayton said, not going to stop every time. If somebody rides up and there's no cars coming, they'll probably blow right through it. But at least this way, it gives the opportunity for them to stop, for traffic to see them, and hopefully provide a little bit more safety there. And we've got a couple other intersections as well that we're looking at for that grant application. So we'll be going tomorrow and making our presentation, and knock on wood, hopefully we'll get a grant for that.
I wish you well and good luck with that presentation. And we don't have to do it at a council meeting, but I'd be interested in seeing how that presentation works or what you're providing in that presentation at some time.
Well, I'm not quite done with it yet. I'm working on it as soon as I get out of here. I've got to go take some pictures and put them in the PowerPoint, but I'd be happy to give you a copy of it when we get back from here.
Most appreciative. At the moment, I have a motion on the floor to send to the city council or full council without recommendation. Not seeing any other lights coming up. The motion is to send. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed. Thank you for the great discussion. Motion carries. Item 42. Oh, excuse me. Is there any public comments on item number 42? And I did not get any paperwork filled out on that. Just wanted to make sure that we've got everybody covered in here that wanted to make a public comment on item 42. Seeing none, public comment is closed. Item 42 is a request by Lazy P6 Land Company for water sewer service for property located outside of the city corporate city limits, and that is generally located south and east of 5th Street and Catron Boulevard intersection. At this time, to get this whole thing started off, I am going to look to our city engineering department or public works director. If you would like to start this up for us, please, Mr. Walterstorff.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. What you have before you is a formal request by Lazy P6 Land Company for utilizing water and sewer services outside the city limits. And I have attached the agenda summary, the current resolution that we've been operating under since 2005 that spells out the criteria and the rates that we utilize when we get these requests. And at that, I guess I'd recommend we let the applicant's engineer visit with you guys first.
Thank you, Mr. Walterstorff. Mr. Kostowski, you may certainly make a presentation, and can you give me a concept or a general idea about how long this presentation will be?
This is me, Mr. Chair. I can get it done with a simple yes, but I don't think we're going to.
As you saw, the green light came up immediately.
And you might notice that staff people have been drifting in here. So yes. I suspect they think this is going to be an event of some kind. The Christians and the Lions. I don't know how this is going to work.
We do have the video cameras or the TV cameras here as well. So
it's perfectly good. So
pleasure to have you, Mr. Kostowski.
And it's always a pleasure to be here too, by the way. So Lazy P6 looks at the agenda item yesterday late, and their first reaction was, this is disingenuous, and I'm going to explain why. On Friday, there was a meeting. Public Works Chair was there, Council President was there, more staff people than I can actually remember, and Lazy P6's group, 3 from Lazy P6 and myself. I know Dale was there because he was sitting right next to me, had a little fun at my expense, which I probably deserved. But at that meeting, it ended with, and if I have permission to ask Terry a question if it comes to it, can I get permission in advance?
State your question, and then we'll decide after that.
Okay, he's the only one who knows the answer, though. Okay. So at the end of the meeting, Terry advanced a suggestion that P6 certainly believed was worth exploring, because it sounded like it dovetailed with some agreements that have already been approved. Well, they looked at what was presented to you today, and really doesn't bear any resemblance to what they thought was going to happen after Friday's meeting. And I was just going to ask Terry what changed.
If I could, Chair.
Mr. Walterstorff, do you understand the question?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Okay.
I do understand the question. I think what changed was when I was putting the documentation together. Again, at the meeting, I did not have a formal copy of the 2005 resolution, so I was going off of my recollection at the time, and I didn't have the site plan off. When I looked at Rapid Map, and when you highlight on Rapid Map Unit 11, you don't just get Unit 11, you also get the undivided interest in the uncommon ground, I think. So in my mind, some things did change a little bit from this standpoint. The resolution clearly says that if you're contiguous to the city, that you annex prior to receiving the services. And when I looked at Rapid Map, it was evident that, and the quirky way it's kind of laid out, it technically is contiguous to the city. So really, I didn't attach a staff memo or anything that I mean, I have my opinions on this, but what I attached was the applicant's formal request, the site plan, which is basically right off of Rapid Map that shows the location, and the 2005 resolution. So that's all that's attached to the agenda. But in fairness, it is different than where we had left the meeting. That's correct.
Can I get slides? Or,
yep, yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Yep.
So do you want to see north to north, or all of you have an internal compass?
You're going the correct way. You're going the correct way.
All right.
Thank you.
This was attached to the documents you received from the applicant, okay? And the 2005 resolution that Terry refers to was talked about for all of 20 seconds. What we actually talked about was this ordinance, which I don't know when you guys redid these, 2010, 9, 11, I'm not sure. Now, in Lazy P6's memo to you, you'll notice that they reference this, 1304-150. Okay? And it says, like all the things that I remember for the last 25 years, you guys get to decide. That's what it says. As to contiguous, I don't want to get in a big argument about that. I'm sorry, you guys are still looking at it. That's what it says. It's up to you guys. And that was the discussion that was held Friday, by the way. Not about the resolution, about this ordinance and who could approve what the rate range could be, up to 300%. Yeah, right, 300%. It could be that high. So this yellow line on this drawing, that's actually the city limit line. I guess, to me, contiguous means coincident. And this Unit 11 is hardly contiguous. In fact, the reason I'm sure of that is because Terry's suggestion on Friday was, because he understands contiguous just like I do. And he also remembered the approved oversize agreement, which includes area triggers, which I can show you if you care to see them. Might be helpful. This is an exhibit in the oversize agreement. And I could tell Terry remembered that, because what he was saying was, this was his suggestion Friday. He said, all right, here's something for you to consider. We'll let you punch into the water and sewer on these, and as soon as they become contiguous because he wasn't considering this contiguous. He said as soon as it becomes contiguous, it has to be annexed, that unit. And we talked a little bit about it. And this is right off the annexation agreement, or I'm sorry, the oversize agreement that was approved 6 months ago or whatever. This, you see it says Phase 1 and Phase 2 annexation. That piece right there. That is U11. That's U11 right there. That. So it actually ended, I thought anyway, in, yeah, we know you're building all the improvements at your expense, at P6's expense. City doesn't have any money in this, as the memo states. Doesn't have any money in this water and sewer. And it just seemed, from a technical perspective, it seemed reasonable to do. And we know, the city is thinking, we know that you have to annex when you want your oversize money. And at that point, you'll be contiguous, yellow line running right there. And you can annex it at that time. And P6's reaction to the suggestion was, okay, that's certainly something we should review. And Terry was going to put something together. So imagine their surprise when they looked at what was provided to you today. Okay? Even though they specifically referenced the ordinance and the fact that you have the ability to do what you want. So I get the unpleasant job of kind of filling in the rest of the information, so to speak. You understand P6's request? I will stop talking.
Mr. Kostinowski, I hope we don't degenerate into a contest there where who's disingenuous or who's telling the truth in this matter. So I'm just a little concerned about the word that you used a little bit earlier about Mr. Walterstorff being disingenuous by adding that item to the agenda. What he is doing is something of a request that I was making to him so that I could see that resolution and then making that available to the rest of the committee. So if there's anybody that's at fault of it, I'll take some of the blame for that because he's just following a request of mine. If that's a surprise for you folks, I'll gladly send out an apology for that, but I just needed that information to the rest of the committee. If I may, I'd like to call upon the city attorney's office to give us a comment or so, whatever you desire, Joel, about the ordinance that Mr. Kostinowski is referring to. And then if you would like to expound upon that, or definitely want to give you some latitude on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, as the ordinance says, you have a right to decide if you want to allow people outside the city to connect. There's a resolution in place. The resolution requires that if it's contiguous to the city, that they annex. And if they don't, then there are consequences for failure to do so. It's not an ordinance, that is a resolution that sets the policy. If you wanted to alter that resolution or alter it for this property, you could certainly do that and provide different terms. Again, you would be setting a precedent, and you may hear other people request then special consideration. Beside that, when we get into the contiguous discussion, quite frankly, this is where what Mr. Davis did down there really starts to become confusing, and legally how it's complicated it. Where's the...
You don't think I'm going to show you how to use it, do you?
Well, I think it's that. I'm having trouble here. All of that looks like lots and parcels. They're not. They're units. There was a quarter section or a quarter section, I'm not sure, but there was a parcel there, and Mr. Davis went and filed a condominium plat on it, and all those parcels that look like lots are actually units in a condominium, and the areas that appear to be right-of-way are actually the common areas of the condominium that everyone jointly owns. When you're talking about a normal condominium, you're talking about a parcel of land, somebody builds a building on it, and one of the condo units is a building within that unit, or on that parcel. So there's a parcel that has multiple units on it, and you can have an ownership interest in those units. While this looks like a plat that you might see of a subdivision with lots, again, it's not. This is very unusual. This was approved probably in the early part of the 2000s, and at the time, we didn't challenge it. So frankly, we're kind of stuck with it now. But you could argue that the whole parcel, including all of the units, they should all be annexed together, in my opinion. But the council did previously, in conjunction with the oversize agreement, decide that only some of those units needed to be annexed. But when you start talking about whether the parcel or the land is contiguous, I would argue every unit within that condominium is on a parcel, one parcel, and that parcel is now getting serviced, that all of the units and all the entire parcel, including all the units, should be annexed at this time, not just here and there. I mean, let's cut to the chase. The reason that Mr. Davis is doing that, he doesn't want to develop that lot in the city, because then he's paying city building permit fees. There's going to be other conditions. It is cheaper for him to develop that in the county. So he doesn't want to annex that in. Even if he has to, per the resolution, pay the higher rate for water, for an industrial use like this, or commercial use, the amount of water that's going to be used there for probably a bathroom is going to be so small that the cost is insignificant compared to if that was developed in the city. So that's the real reason we're having this discussion about annexation and why he doesn't want to annex it in. You know, the council did allow him previously to only annex in some of the units, but as far as the argument of what's contiguous, again, I go back, my argument would be the entire parcel that all of those condominium units sit on is contiguous. That those aren't parcels. And if you look at it, the lot we're talking about, the lot across the street is going to be annexed or has been annexed into the city. It's adjacent to the common area, and all of the lots share that common area. So now the common area is adjacent to the annexation. This just demonstrates why this whole quarter section is a legal mess. And he did that for his own reasons, but this is part of the problem. I know we've identified this earlier and talked to the council about it. This is one of the reasons that we were concerned about it and are not happy with the fact that rather than platting this property, it was turned into condominiums, and why we would oppose that happening in the future. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that basically is what I have to say about it.
It does. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Landy. The chair will recognize Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to continue this item for 2 weeks to the next Public and Works Committee.
Again, that'll be February 25th. Motion is made by Alderwoman Scott to continue this item to February 25th, seconded by Alderman Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I'm continuing this is if I had to vote today on this, I would be denying it because it's way too confusing. And it sounds like there's been conversation started, and I would just encourage this conversation to kind of see if you guys can iron out a more succinct option going forward, because just to let you know my position today, it looks like annexation's the way to go. So I'm offering up to continue this for 2 weeks for further consideration. Thank you.
I've got a second already, yep. I'm going to leave that alone. The motion right now is to move this to February 25th. I'm not seeing any other discussion on this item for continuation. Alderwoman Scott, one more time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification, I had said the council meeting was Monday night. Want to clarify for everyone watching, I was informed it's Tuesday night, so don't want anybody showing up on Monday night. Council meeting is Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder.
May,
So a lot of us would have been here Monday night. Thank you.
I accept
Mr.
that.
Mr. Koskinen.
I
Yes.
don't have any problem with that. Would there be any benefit to inviting some or all of you to meetings? Because we have done that. We've talked to Councilwoman Doyle, Councilperson Wright, Richie. We spent 2 hours with you. When was it, yesterday or Friday?
Yesterday already.
Mm-hmm. Time flies.
Yes.
So we will email the invite, and if you choose to meet, that's fine. Okay. I got you. Thank you for your time, by the way.
You're welcome. And I don't want to confuse the point, and I don't want to have this included in part of the motion, but there is one other alternative that we can consider, and that is something called you mentioned it earlier, is called an annexation agreement. We need to get educated about it, how that works, but that is a tool that is available, and this group here is not familiar with it just yet, but that is something else to consider at possibly the 25th.
And you and I talked about that yesterday in Orville at some length, and I will tell you the scope of what Brett is thinking about for an annexation agreement, which to my knowledge we've never done in Rapid City, an annexation agreement. It's just take it or leave it, pretty much. At least my memory is that. This is an intriguing idea. But P6's land is so vast, relatively speaking, that we're not going to accomplish that for many months. And P6 would like to hook this up. So I've held my tongue based on what Joel said about the formation of the identifying properties, and you can see Rapid Map produced by the county, who recognizes these as distinct parcels, and they've been recognizing them for many years. So I don't know if that adds anything, but you should know that.
Thank you.
Thank you again. I appreciate it. Sorry to disappoint you guys. No fireworks. No yelling and screaming.
That's quite all right. Motion is to continue, not seeing any further discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Not have any other items on the agenda. Second. Motion by Alderwoman Scott to adjourn, seconded by Alderman Roberts. Those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you for the great discussion.